Hey everyone, it's Colin from Legalized Mystery Productions. Thank you for joining me and welcome. Today we're going to do the second part of our step-by-step tutorial, how to paint Iron Hands Space Marines. And today we're going to be doing the steel metallics on the model, which for Iron Hands is a pretty significant portion of the model. So we're going to start with Vallejo Metal Color Exhaust Manifold. And if you haven't had an opportunity to try these metal colors out, I highly recommend them. They are fantastic. They just cover really, really well right out of the bottle. And they're meant for airbrush and brush. And you can see how viscous they are. And they just cover brilliantly. And you can also see there's a little bit of green, a little bit of brown. They're just really interesting colors. So looking at the model, we're going to do the standard kind of undersuit here in the joints. And obviously the portions of the bolter that are going to stay metallic, and then we'll be painting the bolter casing white. So that's going to be probably the last thing that we do because there's the least margin for error in that part of the paint job. Obviously painting white, very challenging, but we're going to go ahead and tackle that at the end, and that's really going to make this model stand out. And it'd be, decidedly Iron Hands. So because they're Iron Hands, we're also going to base coat their hands with the same metallic, but we're going to highlight it a little differently to get some differentiation between the Iron Hands iron part of their armor on their hands and just the standard kind of bolt gun casing. So we have another joint there. We have the chest aquila. One of the things that's so nice about painting Iron Hands is just how utilitarian they are and how straightforward their color scheme is. But you do want to execute it well so that you'd be able to tell that there was a good amount of effort put into the model, that it's not just, oh, I painted it black and dry brushed some metal parts and boom, Iron Hands. I mean, you could do that, but we're aiming a little bit higher with this tutorial. And with the Mark II helmet, we're going to be going on, he has kind of a ring around his head of just a little armor detail on the helmet there. And again, this isn't obviously a standard Primaris helmet, but I do think, and once we highlight that, you'll be able to see it a little better. But I do think that it gives the Primaris model a decidedly Iron Hands feel. So again, coming back here to do the undersuit. And overall, this model is going to be pretty dark, which works because, again, Iron Hands being black. One thing I really like about this metallic black scheme is that it is visually interesting, even though it's quote-unquote just a black, white, and silver for the most part with some green, OSL and lenses. There are definitely ways to make it a visually interesting scheme and not just, oh, you painted some Iron Hands, okay. But be like, those are really cool Iron Hands. Those are different. So that's what we're going for. But this first step is just kind of setting the baseline for the scheme with these silver metallics. And then once we finish this step, oops, got a little on the backpack there, but I could just wipe it off. Another thing that's nice about these metal colored paints is they are so thin that they have a little bit longer working time, and that really helps us when we make little brush errors like that. We can just wipe it right off. So doing the other pad trim, I'm actually really excited for this scheme. I know everybody and their mother is excited for the Codex supplement that's coming out. That's very, very good. But I really like this scheme. I developed the black armor recipe technique a while ago. I was planning on doing a Horus Heresy Iron Hands army, and it just never got off the ground. And then Heresy really just wasn't being played by anybody I know, so I ended up offloading that. But I've been wanting. I did a test model for the armor, but I never did like a full miniature. So I'm really excited about this. So we base coated those metallic elements, and this stuff also dries really fast, which is handy. So we're going to go just in the same order that we painted it on, and by the time we get to that last area there, the rest of the silver metallic should be dry. So just this, and this is just Nuln Oil. I transfer all my shades. I transfer most of my paints into dropper bottles. Most of my GW P3 paints. It's just easier. Paint lasts longer. Easier to store. The wash pots don't fall over and spill. So just all around, and you can get them super cheap on Amazon. Those little dropper bottles. Don't buy the hobby specific ones from any of the hobby retailers online, because they'll charge you like $5 for 3 or something. That's a racket. You really just you can go online and find them super, super cheap. And when you have as many paints as I do, cheap is good. Just leaves more money to buy paint. I realize I skipped ahead, but this is already dry. That's how fast this stuff dries, which is fantastic when you're trying to work quickly and efficiently. Drying times is definitely something to consider. Again, if I were doing like a squad of intercessors or something like that, I'd be doing 5 or 10 of these guys at a time, so it was going to be dry anyway. But for the purposes of tutorial, it's even better. So we'll get the little squares, little vents on the backpack there. And we do want to be a little careful with the wash that we don't. You see I just got it on the backpack there a little bit. And then I just grabbed some water, rubbed it off, and then I'm just getting the dry brush and kind of pulling that water off. I don't want the Nuln Oil, because it dries so matte, I don't want that to matte down kind of the portion of the armor around the area we're washing. I don't want that to happen. So I want to be a little bit targeted with the wash, and it's not hard to do. If it does end up matting it down a little bit, it's not the end of the world. But if we can avoid it, we'd like to. And then the next portion of the video, or the tutorial rather, we'll do like the eye lenses and the highlighting, and then we're pretty much home free on these guys. We're gonna do a satin varnish at the end to really maintain that nice shine that we have going on the armor. You can see, especially on like the lower legs and stuff, just how it's just really nice. That kind of oily black, more Heresy aesthetic. I just really, really, really like. Oops, we almost forgot the little skull and winged skull there. Now typically we do that gold, but it's going to be surrounded by white, so it's going to stand out. And if we did that gold and it was the only thing that was gold on the model, it would look out of place and it would be just way too much of a focal point visually because it is kind of extended towards the front of the gun, towards the front of the model. And we don't want that. We don't want the focus to be on that little winged skull piece up front. So we have some. So normally I would just highlight exhaust manifold with pale burnt metal, and this is a really cool kind of greenish brownish. It has the same tonal qualities as exhaust manifold, but it's much lighter. So you can see there on the palette. This is the pale burnt metal here, and that's the exhaust manifold there. Usually I just go in and just do a little texture with the pale burnt metal, but because it's such a, it's really the secondary color from this color scheme, I'm going to mix in with a little bit of the exhaust manifold and get something of a mid-tone. So you can see the exhaust manifold there in the cup, and then it's a little bit lighter up here, and then we're going to go to the pure. We're going to go to the pure pale burnt metal. So we want to just do how we normally we'd be very careful about edge highlighting this, but because we want to give it that metallic look, we're going to feather that brush out just like we did on like the leather tutorial. So that this brush is already destroyed. This doesn't have a nice point on it. So we're going to feather that out to where we're able to do kind of little lines. And we're just going to highlight, and you can see how we get down towards the bottom, and it's just kind of a very gradual progression. And again, we use the side of the brush on the really hard edges, and then it's almost like it's kind of like a controlled dry brush, but we want to make sure, and you can hopefully, maybe if I block, there we go. If I change the lighting, so you can see how it's a little bit textured. We're getting those little striations. See if I can zoom in a little bit for you here. Try and zoom in a little bit so you can really see what I'm talking about. So you can see on the shoulder pad there, those little striations. That's what we want, because we have this brush feathered out to where it's making these little lines rather than just a pure highlight. Get this bad boy back in focus. There we go. So rather than just a pure highlight, like a sharp highlight, we are creating a little bit of texture. Again, because this is really the secondary color in the color scheme is this steel metallic. And we want to make sure that we're fading out as we get further back. We want to follow that shadow. We're still going to be painting steel, but it's going to be brighter kind of 2/3 of the way back, and then it's going to kind of fade out a little bit. But this is hard. This is harder to do with metallics than it is with kind of just your regular paint scheme. And we're actually just going to stop there. We're not going to paint that last kind of portion there and leave it in shadow. Then we'll go, it's almost like a little ringlet halo piece on his head. I wouldn't call it that to his face, but it's kind of what it looks like. And the other shoulder, again, just really kind of choppy strokes. And I've taken a lot of the paint off and then kind of fade it out. And we want to make sure that we get that lower portion of the pad there, but we don't want to fill in. We want a little bit of shadow left right in there to give it that kind of 3D, kind of maintain that shadow. If we just went through and just went with the silver, it wouldn't be as interesting. It wouldn't be as compelling as if we took a little bit extra time, again, with the flayed out brush. So you can see this brush is kind of flattened out. This is a perfect brush for this because we just get those little striations, which add a little bit of texture and a little bit of interest. And that's the name of the game. Otherwise, you'd have a very, if you just went through and just went boo, 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 and just did like straight highlights, it would still look good, but you'd have a very one-dimensional, it would just be a different color of metal. What we're trying to do here is we're trying to differentiate as well from the really smooth armor that's going to stay pretty smooth, and then that kind of hammered steel almost. And then on the Aquila, we're actually going to pick up a little bit more paint, and we're going to try and get a decent tip back on this brush so that we can work those feathers a little bit on the eagle. And there is not a lot of paint on this brush because we're just trying to highlight the top there and kind of work our way down and turn the model, kind of sneak back there. And this is why we don't paint the bolter casing before. That's why the bolter casing is like the last thing to do, because trying to get back here, and you could leave the bolter off, but for me, it's just more time. It's just kind of, so you can see back there we did get that. We did get those wings, and we are looking pretty good. So now we're going to go with just pale burnt metal, and we're going to hit. Now we're really going to hit those highlights. So just the very top of that hand there, kind of the front finger there, and we're leaving the suit joints alone. We're leaving those very, very dark, because in this scheme we don't want to draw attention. You can see the little head ringlet thing around the helmet. We don't want to draw attention to the suit joints. Suit joints are like such an afterthought as far as paint scheme that we really don't want to accentuate those in any meaningful way. But they look, like we go on the back here, they look metallic, they look very subdued next to the armor, and that's what we want. We want them to be in the background. So pure pale burnt metal, being even more targeted with the highlights, and then stopping just right at the top there. So you can see, you can see that's really, really much lighter compared to the original when we just had that mix going. And that's perfect. That's what we want. So a little bit on the thumb back there, a little bit on those squares. Sorry, I keep pulling it out of focus. Let's just move that. There we go. So we're starting to really get a nice effect on the model here. Again, here at the top, boop, boop, boop. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, 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 tap. And then for the, so you can see how much starker the highlight is on the bolter on the gun. And that's what we want. We want that. This is just pale burnt metal over the wash without kind of that middle step. And that's what we want. We want the bolter to look much, much cleaner and brighter to differentiate it. So you can see the bolter is standing out much more than those shoulder pads are. And that's good because we want some differentiation there. We want to know that it's not the exact same metal between those two elements. So that is how we're going to paint those steel. And then when we come back and we do an oil wash on this model, it's really going to pull that steel down and pull all these elements together and give a really nice worn effect. And just kind of bring the whole thing together. So steel metallics, and then while we are at it, let's grab a little foam, and we're going to do some sponge chipping, but we're not doing chipping necessarily. This is how we're going to highlight this model. So I have this pluck foam from any kind of carrying case. Let's zoom this back out. I'm going to take a more macro look at this. That's better. So what we're going to do is very controlled. We're going to take the same exhaust manifold, mix in a little bit of that pale burnt metal. You get a little bit more on the palette here. And we want to be targeted with this, but we don't want to be uniform, right? Because randomness is going to look more natural. So we can start with just testing out and seeing this. And we want to be very, very gentle with this, but just a little. So you can see there, just a little on the forearm. And really we're doing this the same areas that we would do. That's even a little. And then remember what I said about the drying time. So just wipe some of that off, and that's much, much better. So we're actually going to dab even more of that off because that was too heavy. And we're going to go in and just very lightly. And we want more exhaust manifold. That's too light. Same areas that we would highlight, just edge highlighting. And we're just tapping it with the sponge. And why we're doing that instead of edge highlighting is to keep that texture, is to keep that kind of hammered iron feel to the armor. If we went in, that's way too much. Whoop. There we go. If we went in and just did like a sharp edge highlight, it would just look way too clean, way too polished. So we're going to go in with the sponge and just very carefully, very controlled. And the oil wash is going to knock some of that down as well. So like the outside of the vents, again, the same spots that we would be edge highlighting is where we're doing this sponge technique. And a little bit on the vents there, a little bit behind the head, a little bit on the top of the head, a little bit here, just a touch on the shoulders because we don't want to muck those shoulders up. A little bit on the outside of this arm. And that's just going to give us that much more visual interest. And you can see that it's starting, excuse me. You can't see a whole lot. So you can see there, just a little bit of visual interest in that shoulder. And it's starting to define those panels down by the legs, on the backpack. You can see on the top of the backpack there. And I realize the satin metallic, it's hard. That's why I keep turning the model a lot, because of the lighting. But you can see like on the hip plate there, and a little on the shoulder there, a little on the helmet. And it's just enough, and on the knees especially, the top of the feet. So the same head, shoulders, knees, and toes, same progression that we would do with just regular brush highlights, but that sponging is going to give us that texture and that visual interest and that highlight, but without going through and trying to find like a dark metallic that would be a really nice edge highlight. I just don't think it fits. I just don't think it fits the scheme at all. I think keeping it textural and keeping it beaten, and I think it's just much better for the scheme overall than doing super controlled highlights. If we were painting this guy flat black, then we would be going through and doing some nice highlights and probably some sponge chipping and stuff like that. But one of the things I like about this scheme is that we get two birds with one stone with the sponging, and we get really nice texture and a highlight at the same time. So that's it for the steel metallics. And we're going to come back and do eye lenses. Ooh, almost missed. Just kidding. That was almost it for the steel metallics. So we almost missed highlighting this little winged skull piece up here. And maybe just a couple little... And this is a nice time to go in with that flat brush again. Kind of fan it out. And like the front of the gorget here, we didn't get any sponging done. Kind of this elbow joint here that's so important. We can just get a little texture on there and just kind of hit. Again, there's not much paint on this at all. And we just want to tap it. We don't want to go around and just put lines on everything on this guy because it would look unnatural. So that's it for part 2. And we're going to come back with part 3 and do a little bit more detailing. And then it'll be, oil wash and transfers. So this is going to be a pretty quick tutorial. Thank you all, and we will see you again soon. Thanks.